Our scripture today comes from the Gospel of Luke, the 3rd chapter, and I will do my best to read this passage today. It's probably one of the most challenging passages in Scripture. It is a genealogy passage. It's got all kinds of names in it, and I will do my best to honor the names that I will read today. Jesus was about 30 years old when he began his work. He was the son, as was thought, of Joseph, son of Heli, son of Matthat, son of Levi, son of Melchi, son of Jannai, son of Joseph, son of Mattathias, son of Amos, son of Nahum, son of Esli, son of Nagai, son of Moth, son of Mattathias, son of Simeon, son of Joshek, son of Joda, son of Jonan, son of Resa, son of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, son of Neri, son of Melchi, son of Adai, son of Kosam, son of Eladam, son of son of Joshua, son of Eleazar, son of Joram, son of Matthat, son of Levi, son of Simeon, son of Judah, son of Joseph, son of Jonam, son of Eliakim, son of Meliah, son of Menah, son of Mattatha, son of Nathan, son of David, son of Jesse, son of Obed, son of Boaz, son of Salah, son of Nashon, son of Amminadab, son of Admin, son of Arni, son of Hezron, son of Perez, son of Judah, son of Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham, son of Terah, son of Nahor, son of Serug, son of Reu, son of Peleg, son of Ebner, son of Shelah, son of Canaan, son of Arphaxad, son of Shem, son of Noah, son of Lamech, son of Methuselah, son of Enoch, son of Jared, son of Matthaleel, son of Cain, son of Enos, son of Seth, son of Adam, son of God. May we pray together. Gracious one, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing and strengthening to you, our rock and our Redeemer. My wife and I have been blessed to have opportunities to travel and to travel internationally on a few occasions. And one of our travel trips took us to England, and we saw some of the familiar England sights, but we also got to go to some of the outlying bedroom small communities in England. And one of the great places, I guess, as a minister to visit is churches and cities. So Jennifer and I went and visited one of the small local communities and visited a small local church and loved seeing the simple architecture and some of the symbolism that was on the walls or embedded in the architecture itself. And after visiting the church and seeing this beautiful little place of worship, we made our way out of the building, shut the door, and began walking down the sidewalk. And there was a woman that clearly lived in that community that was walking up the sidewalk toward the church, and she kind of made a detour to the left, which was a cemetery. And that's not uncommon in England to have cemeteries all surrounding a church building. And she kind of meandered through all these grave sites and made her way back to the path. And we simply said, I hope you're doing okay. Hello. We just kind of did a simple greeting. And she says, I'm just on my daily walk. And I walk by here every day. And I walk through these graves to remember who I am. And I just kind of took that in. And that she goes on a daily walk to remember who she is. That's a really powerful way to think about getting a little exercise, but going down not only memory lane, but identity lane for herself. And how important that was for her. Years ago, I was serving a church in Texas, and my great uncle had passed away. Now, a little history before my great uncle passed away. My grandparents, who were both ministers, were buried in this cemetery in the middle of Fort Worth, Texas, in Greenwood Cemetery. And I would go on All Saints Day and their birthdays and stop by the graves and honor them and say a little prayer by their graveside. Years later, my great uncle passed away on my dad's side of the family, opposite side of the family. I did not know my great uncle, but my dad's family system didn't have a minister, and so I was usually the designated person to facilitate family services. So I was called upon. My great uncle and great aunt lived in a town called Granbury, about 30 miles away from Fort Worth. So I go out there to meet my great aunt for the very first time and learn about my great uncle for the very first time so I could facilitate this funeral service for them. And in the midst of the details of learning about him, I asked where the service was going to be, and they said Greenwood Cemetery in Fort Worth. And I said, oh, there's a lot of services that happen. It's a large cemetery. When we got to the graveside to do my great uncle's service, which is on my dad's side of the family, I almost broke down in tears because about 50 paces away were my grandfather and grandmother from my mom's side of the family. Totally identified plots years in advance, and here I had two sides of the family within 50 paces of one another in the same cemetery. And so every time I would go to Greenwood Cemetery, I would think of my mom's family. I would think of my dad's family. Just this interesting kind of memory lane we would travel down in my head of who was in this place and who's been a part of my family tree in some way. This Luke passage, which is not necessarily an easy passage to recite. It's a lot of names. I'm sure I didn't do justice to a few of those names along the way. And I think this is one of the genealogy stories that's told in the Gospels. And there are two. There's one in the Gospel of Matthew, and there's one in the Gospel of Luke. And they're similar, and they're different. They're similar, and they try to tell a lineage, a connection between Jesus and us. They're different in terms of who's included and where in the gospel it's told. Now, in Matthew's gospel, the genealogy is the first thing that comes in the Gospel of Matthew. When I was a little kid and I got my first Bible and I was going to read about Jesus, I couldn't wait to get started reading the Bible. I opened it up to Matthew, and there's all these begats. I closed it and didn't read the Bible for several more years because I thought, this is a boring book. I don't know these names. I don't know who they're connected to. I'm not sure. This is above my head. I'm not going to do this. But genealogies are an important piece. They're interwoven to a story for a reason. Matthew's gospel includes women in the genealogy. And in Matthew's version, it starts and goes and ends with Abraham. Now, Luke's gospel is in chapter 3. It's not at the beginning. It's in chapter 3. And the genealogy doesn't include women. And it goes all the way back to Adam, which I find kind of interesting, versus Abraham, which you find in Matthew. And it starts in chapter 3. Book of Matthew, right from the get-go, genealogy. And I think Matthew included genealogy at the very beginning because it was intended for more of a Jewish audience. They wanted to tie Jesus to the lineage of Abraham and the Jewish heritage, and they wanted to know right up front, this is a person that's definitely connected to the tradition of which you are a part. In Luke's gospel, it's chapter 3, and it comes after all the infancy narratives, chapter 1 and 2. And the beginning part of chapter 3 is the baptism story of Jesus. His encounter with John the Baptist and his baptism. As soon as he's baptized, the very next story after he's baptized is this genealogy story. Now, as a reminder, a gospel story has a unique kind of audience to it when a gospel was written. Sometimes we think of gospels like little histories of Jesus. And there's history in it, but I don't really think of gospels as books of history. They're really books of persuasion. They were intended to be written so that the reader of that gospel would say, I want to be a part of this movement. It was intended to draw more people into the movement, draw more people into being followers of the way and followers of Jesus and being a part of this ministry that Jesus had done with his life and his passion. So why throw a genealogy in the midst of this persuasive document to say, I want to be a part of this? Why is genealogy in there? It's partly there to say where this movement has come from, but it's also to say, I get to be a part of this movement now and going forward. It's important to know where we come from, who we're a part of, how we identify ourselves in terms of the things we do today and the ways going forward with ourselves. Now, the study of genealogy and where we've come from is an interesting kind of thing. I had a friend, Joe, who was going to make a trip to Norway, and he had heard in his family lore that his family had Norway roots. So he thought, well, before I go there, it'd be kind of cool to do some genealogy to find out how true that really is. For sometimes we learn that some parts of our story are kind of like, where did that come from? Not really know. It's just kind of stuff that ends up in our family lore and storytelling. Well, he decided to do some online genealogy work, and Joe is kind of a computer person. He knows how to do all that stuff. And he said, at the beginning, he said, I think this is going to be really hard to trace me all the way back to Norway. I'm not sure if I can do that or not, when he first started out. And about a year later, we were riding in a car together, and I asked him, I said, how's that genealogy stuff going? He goes, it's been amazing. It's been amazing in a surprising way. He said, I thought I was going to have to do all this work. And then I said, I knew me, I knew my parents, I knew my grandparents, and I knew my great-grandparents. And after that, I thought I was going to be in trouble because I didn't have a lot of information of people that had already died in my family. I didn't know how I was going to get further on in my genealogy work. But the cool thing was when I got to this website to do genealogy, once I entered in the 4 generations that I knew, someone else that I was genealogically connected to had already done the work online. And by the time I got to that 5th generation, it was already there. He said, I went all the way back over 1,000 years of lineage of my family. And I thought, I just had to do 3 or 4 generations of work, and the rest was already done for me. It's kind of interesting when we think about something like that. We think about who we are and how we identify and how we are connected to one another. We think we're going to have to do all this work when other people have already been doing significant work around us and not even knowing it. And all of a sudden, the sense of family becomes stronger, more powerful once we know there's others already doing the work that we want to be a part of as well. Now, there's an author, some of the women in the church have read this author, Shanda Jha, who's written a book, Rebels, Despots, and Saints, which is a book about ancestry. And one of the things that she talks about is perspective of our ancestry. We often think of like looking back. What can we research of what's gone before us? And one of the places in the book she talks about perspective of when we're the person being looked back upon. I think that's such a cool concept of imagining generations out looking back at me or you in history. What will they discover about me or you when several generations in front of us decide to look back and do a little history diving, a little digging deeper about themselves? What will they discover? Will I have been inconsequential with my life? Will I have made a difference in someone's life? What stories will people have told about me in one way or another? The interesting thing about stories is we like to choose the stories that we tell, and Shanda Jha talks about the danger of romanticizing our ancestry. We like to tell the good stories, and we like to leave the bad stories out. Or we like particular stories that need to be told, and others are just conveniently left out in some way. And we live in an interesting time right now where we are debating and arguing over what stories are told, if stories should be told, what stories should be canceled out, which stories are getting erased. We have a series right now where pictures are just being eliminated, deleted from the military because of certain language that's being shared. It's just crazy how we think about stories and the whole story, the diversity of stories, the background of stories. All those stories make up who we are. I mean, the gospel writers, or the people that decided what was going to go in the Bible, they could have just said, this is the one gospel. But they chose 4. I mean, they could have maybe chosen more. They chose a multiplicity of gospels. We have 4 gospels, not just one. We have multiple stories that are told to communicate the story of Jesus. We have a Matthew gospel that tells more of a Jewish perspective. We have Luke's gospel, which I kind of call the social justice gospel, more inclusive of women, more inclusive of people in the margins that Matthew doesn't capture. We have Mark that's kind of like the urgent gospel. Everything's happening right away. We have the theological, philosophical gospel of John that has more elongated stories and more metaphor built into them than other gospels. And I think we need this multiplicity of stories so we can find our place in that story versus just one story. This is the right way. This is the right way you do this. We found there's more than one way to get somewhere and how important it is to do that. Part of that, leaning into history, part of leaning into our ancestry, is recognizing the multiplicity of family trees we're a part of. And partly modeled with the kids today is that we have our immediate blood family tree. We have all kinds of good and bad stories related to our family. There's always the one person like, I'm not sure I want to invite them to the Thanksgiving meal. I mean, there's all the people that have all these nuances of the goods and bads of our family tree. And we learn something about myself. I have stories and books and resources of people in my own family of that's kind of where I get this. My goofy, silly humor partly comes from my dad. I mean, part of my silly jokes and things that I tell, I know that part of that comes from him. His famous joke, a joke he made up. We were driving to a soccer match. We were listening to all this rock music, and my dad couldn't help not chime into the conversation somewhere along the way. He goes, have you heard of this new rock group? And they're going, what rock group? And he always had leading questions, so we'd join in. What rock group? He says, well, the group is called the Pancakes. They're a little flat. And it was really bad. But it kind of gets a sense of where my goofy, silly humor comes. I mean, we have stories back there because it shapes who we are and what we become. But we also have hurtful, damaging stories that we sometimes want to just kind of put in a closet and never open that door. We know sometimes the facing of those stories and working through those stories help us be more authentically real in the world when we need to be. When Luke begins to craft the gospel and orient the order of what things are told, so I'm going to introduce you about this child that enters the world. And we hear that story through the perspective of Mary and Elizabeth and the challenge they go through of holding their children until they come to birth. And there's a celebration of the birth of Jesus with the shepherds and the gathering there in Bethlehem. And then the story goes dark until he's about 30 years old. And Jesus enters in a scene where John the Baptist is down at the River Jordan. And Jesus says, I need to be baptized by you, John. And John's going, not me. I mean, you should be baptizing me, not me baptizing you. You need to baptize me. And in that baptismal story, we hear a voice of God, whether it's heard or not, but it's told in the gospel, this is my son with whom I am well pleased. And then we have this genealogy story that's told. We get introduced to this individual that's about to embark on the world and do significant things. But before he embarks on the world and reaches out to the marginalized and reaches out to those that have had no voice, before he unrolls the scroll in chapter 4 and says, this is what my ministry is going to be about, we get to learn a little bit of where he came from. We recognize that Jesus' ministry is not untethered. It is attached to a rich history of rootedness in the people that have gone before him. Some of that was his blood family. Some of that was maybe his friendship family. Some of that was probably his faith family. And some of that might have been people he was rooted in that he had not even met, but somehow those stories had impacted who he had become. If we want a healthy tree, we realize the healthier the tree, the deeper the roots. That's where we got to start. And part of having deep roots is having the rich soil for those roots to thrive. We all want the fruits at the end. We all want the produce at the end. We all want the harvest at the end. But at the very beginning, we have to have some sense of clarity of who I am, who has informed who I've become, who else needs to be added to me to be a more fuller, more thriving person that's yet to be a part of my family, that should be a part of my family. What roots do I need to be the full, healthy person that God knows I can become? Only when we're rooted do we know what we're capable of becoming.